Thank you all so much for joining me again for another Data4God series. This is actually the first time we've actually had repeat customers on the Data4God series. So I'd like to welcome back Tom Allen and Paul Elliott. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me again.
Hey, Eric.
It's taken us a second attempt to hopefully get this second interview right.
Exactly. The first one went so well. We really needed to bring you guys in for take two.
So I couldn't believe we got 52 million hits.
I know. Isn't that crazy? I don't know. Maybe they count a little differently in England than they do here. But, it's okay. It's okay. So I'm not going to go through the introductions of Paul and Tom again. It's one of those things. Please click in the upper right-hand corner if you want to see their previous interview. Otherwise, let's just sort of jump in. At the end of the last interview, gentlemen, we talked about this thing that you guys are doing. You guys really were talking about this notion of Christian banking and this process of IFBank. How did you end up going down this path? And really just as an idea overall, how did you come up with this idea of sort of a Christian bank?
I think for us, it really started when we kind of had been working at Vision Fund and then a realization that despite all the really good missional benefits it could do, we kind of thought there was something, it was very narrow and focused in terms of it was loans. We kind of also thought that actually there's a bigger market there in the sense of the whole banking sphere, that people need help right across the spectrum, not just in a loan, but in insurance or in savings or a variety of other areas. And I think for us, we also thought that getting something that was set up initially in the focused and right way was also really important. I think what we found with what we've seen with microfinance around the world, and it's not a criticism, but they're set up from development organizations. We kind of thought that there was a real potential and a real calling for us to try and set up something that addressed a really important need of financial services in the world, but one that was set up with from the very core, true Christian principles of integrity and finance and faithfulness to Jesus. So therefore, for us, something that was set up in that way that addressed a real need in the market, but also then chose a different path of how it actually distributed its profits itself, really in a missional sense, was something that we felt called to once we left, and probably over about a 3 or 4 day period when Tom and I got together in Vancouver. We really had initially a thought about something completely different. And over that period of time, as we prayed and talked about it and reflected on it, we both got up each morning with a different idea, which was common. And then it transformed over a period of days into something that was effectively a concept with IFBank to be a global Christian bank that through an allocation of a significant portion of its profits would be given to kingdom impact projects, which would feed the hungry, house the homeless, care for the sick, and spread the gospel, in addition to providing really good quality products. So I think that's how it all started off in terms of in our concept and our calling, I suppose.
Wow, I'm just blown away by that idea that you have some notion of a bank sort of founded on those things, and so, like you said, giving away profits to be able to try and help the kingdom all around it, help the homeless, help the poor. Tell me more about this idea of where you all think IFBank is in its role in the world.
Well, we certainly felt as though there was an opportunity and a challenge out there. There's, with everything you see in the press, what we see as far as some of the social changes and the push for justice and these questions that, seem to be becoming more and more prevalent, ethical investments. How do we do these things? And both Paul and I sort of wrestled with this idea that we dug around. Christianity needs to be involved in every part of life. It's not just a Sunday morning church-driven, charitable NGO piece. We both felt that we were definitely being called into commercial, Monday to Friday, the nuts and bolts of everyday life in that sense. And we wrestle with this idea of, as Paul said, do we just go down another route in a similar vein? Or do we actually look at financial services across the board and go, actually, as a unified industry the world over and Christians' participation in that, there's a real opportunity for us to be salt and light in a different way. and having a bank that is centered on Christian values, putting those not just fundamental but central to everything we did in terms of product and service and fee and relational with clients, being able to think differently, being able to put, for us, the stakeholder being our faith and our belief that God has a view that all mankind needs to be blessed and benefit from this, changes in some ways the mainstream focus of financial services. We both came from commercial aspects where we know an analyst's view of the next quarter is key. Yeah. We didn't want to be bound by that. We wanted to be bound by a God who looked at it and said, actually, I want to see the impact you can have. And as Paul said, by the simple things of feeding those who need to be fed and housing and all of these things that, we as Christians and we as the church are engaged in. We know every Christian has a bank account and we know every church has a banking relationship. Wouldn't it be amazing to have a bank that reflected those same values and thoughts and concepts, and by just the daily activity that would happen normally, being able to realign those activities in a way that was kingdom focused? And that was really something that Paul and I felt challenged on. 5 days into this thing, as Paul said, what we went into our thinking, what we took to that table and what we left from that table were two entirely different things. And we're very clear that God was involved in all of that. And don't get us wrong, we've got a real heart for getting IFBank up and running. But if it's not the answer, we just want to ask these questions. We think there is something special about this question of how can Christians behave differently in this industry.
I think also in terms of IFBank itself, compared with many of the other development organizations, the product that they deliver or the activity that they do is the missional blessing that they're trying to aim. Whereas with IFBank, we thought there was something both different. Firstly, how we actually treated our customers was missional in a way, in terms of just doing things to the best that you can do them, delivering the best product that you can get, which ultimately is if you're a customer stroke Christian, you're getting that. But with the profits that those make, they could then be reinvested in a whole series of things which are outside of just providing a bank account, just providing a good loan, just providing a loan that helps somebody, etc. It's much wider than that, which is you could then give that into a completely different series of kingdom impact causes, which could deliver additional benefit apart from it's just the core product that you've offered in a really good way.
Yeah. Pardon me for being sort of taken aback. Like this notion with like a bank with values and integrity, is that even possible? Okay. I say that facetiously, right? Slightly jokingly. But we all know wonderful people that are great. They're moral people. They work at banks. But let's be honest. I bet a lot of people don't necessarily equate banking and high morals, especially with the news that we've seen over the past few years, right?
Yep.
How do you all plan to be? I mean, this sounds amazing, but how do you all plan to be different and keep that difference?
Yeah, and you're right. The industry over, the last 10, 20, actually, through the decades has suffered from, the decadence, the Wall Street film, the size of the bonuses, what happens when there is a fine, you've seen the Wall Street headlines of, so-and-so's being fined billions of dollars for X, Y, and Z. So you're right, the industry at large does suffer from these issues. We have lived those. We've been in the banks when those issues have occurred, and having to work through and rebuild trust and work through the regulatory implications and all those things. You're right. There is an incredible amount of good, solid, moral people in there. And even to the extent of many of the banks, when you look at their history, started from that same precept. They came with a view of how can we socially help and do those things. But, ironically, there is a industry now that's not necessarily managed, or the way in which they are seen is changed, and we saw an opportunity to be able to do that. And for us, both of us have said that we can't do that in our own self as much as we see those values and everything else. Hence this fact of this is God's bank. This is a Christian bank. This is not Paul and Tom trying to go off and do something unique or different, or just hit that seam of current social view of, it's got to be an ethical bank, we actually want to get down to real fundamentals of founding it in those principles that say Christ first, and as a result, everything else follows from that point. Do we think as Christians we can participate in that industry? Absolutely. Do we think that is an industry with regulation and structure that allows us to be able to participate and compete and succeed the way that other big banks do? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Do we think that we can change some of the resulting consequences and the journey even during that process? Absolutely. We definitely think that that's part of that process. You have a bank account. I have a bank account. Paul has one. Yeah. Everybody, hopefully people listening to this thing. So you bank with somebody already, and you do that either because of ease or because you've always been there and it's hard to think. Yeah. But I don't think many people actually choose these relationships based on who am I, what do I believe, what are my common values, and to find a bank that, both Paul and I said it, let's go and find a Christian bank, and if we could find one, our adventure is over, because we could basically attest to, yes, let's encourage that organization. There are few and far between of those examples, hence the fact we want to wrestle with this question. Now, whether God wants us to succeed specifically, we will see that in time. But we do know that we've been challenged to at least, wrestle with these questions and to propose that actually Christians and the church at large can be engaged in a different way. And we think that's plausible, possible.
And I think also back to the point about that Tom had made about whether, we have bank accounts with organizations with whose profits that they've made off us and many others are used more likely for shareholder benefit than anything else. We wanted to say that since our shareholder was Jesus, then actually a chunk of those profits are going to kingdom impact causes and redeveloping the entity and making it better and all of that. But ultimately, they weren't going to a shareholder. The profits they made of me as a Christian and Tom and you, Eric, that they were being reused and distributed for kingdom impact. So that's number one. I think the other piece was starting right back. I mean, there's lots of really good organizations out there, lots of really good commercial entities out there. And kind of if you listed some of the things that an IFBank would want to do along product and service and those sorts of things, then probably you could mirror them very simply, which is, you want to be really good products, delivered really well, meeting the client needs, etc. They may say that, I think, and whilst we would aspire to that, I think very few you could list as having the values being a kingdom-focused value, for example. And then at the very far end of that, which should drive our behaviors as an entity itself, driving all of that. And ultimately, if the end use and the end result is, which is in some aspects, money talks, how do we actually give it? What do we do with our money? The profits that entity makes, which if it is distributed for kingdom impact and obviously some reinvested to help grow and deliver more product. But if that's the case, then you start from the very start, which is here are the values. They are kingdom focused, hopefully driving our behaviors. And then ultimately at the very end each year, you see that, we've actually made a difference because we've given away the money. That's kind of start to finish.
Wow. See, that's awesome. So now, of course, this is a data interview series. So although I'm going to nerd out over this idea of a Christian bank, I have to bring up some notion of data. So since you all are talking about creating a modern bank with Christian values, I mean, I suspect data is one of the core pieces to the bank. So how do you envision data helping you all with your customers and your mission in this process?
That industry is data. Everyone knows the credit score, the details of what and why and what we're doing and all these pieces. Everyone knows that, their bank accounts and their investment portfolios and the reports that we all get and our pension plans and things. So money and data go hand in hand, and we know the importance of that. I think from our experience, both commercially, when we both look back of where we started our careers, we know firsthand of what that meant as far as running and being accountable to the businesses that we did. So we know the importance of that. We know from our last journey, both Paul and I, as you saw from the other interview, we were with World Vision Fund for 6 years, and we saw the importance of data in a mission-driven financial efforts. And therein lies for us what we think going into IFBank is different. We want to be able to use data to make sensible decisions around what we do and the products we offer and how, where and why and what and all those pieces. So no, in some way, shape or form, no different than every other bank, so how we need to make sure that we address those market realities and regulation and all of the pieces that are fundamental to that industry. We want to go that step further and basically say the impact for us is far more important. So some decisions may be, may from a data perspective for any other bank result in a no answer. We might say yes to certain things because actually when we look at the total picture, so we understand and have an alignment with our clients in a different way. And that's going to be a difficult thing to navigate, and we will need data to be able to do that. We may lend money to a business because we see more than just the dollars and cents. The risk profile for us is about making sure that the loan is repaid. But we've known from our experience with Vision Fund over the last 6 years, we want to see an impact. We want to see lives change. We want to see people employed. We're not going to just simply address these social issues of homelessness and feeding the hungry and doing all of these things that we feel good about as an end result by just simply taking our profits and trying to put those into charities or work that needs to be done. We definitely see that this is day in, day out for 365 days of the bank's activity throughout what we're doing. So we see data as far more about understanding more than just what the numbers say. We want to be aligned with, and that's part of the reason, we're hoping, we feel as though we want to be led with that alignment with Christians and churches to be able to say, actually, you do banking with your current bank in a certain way. A Christian bank should look at things slightly different. What else can be done? What other things are there to be done? And that's sort of why, both for Paul and I, data is key, but we want to use it in a slightly different way.
I think it's also understanding more about certain aspects of the customers and what they need, and that whatever they're at their life stage or life cycle, and also seeing a much greater picture of the customer with the different products that they have. Now, many banks and good financial organizations already will see the client right through, but however, having the data to allow you to then, as Tom said, make a decision about, okay, this customer is going through a really tough time, but we see where they're at in life. Should we stick with them? And therefore, yes, there is a risk, and the data helps with the analysis of the risk. But it also helps us say, well, actually, the reality is, if we're sticking true to our kingdom values, helping someone out when they really need it, it could well be part of how we actually deliver kingdom impact, because actually it may be a loss on the profit and loss or income statement. The fact is, we've actually just helped somebody out who may well ultimately not have survived, certainly in business or whatever, lost their home or whatever. So maybe there are aspects with that, which is the data helps you analyze a decision, but actually the decision on that data may be definitely different between what IFBank may do with a customer than what a traditional organization would do too. So I think there's that as well.
That just sounds amazing, because you're exactly right. If our end shareholder is Jesus, then asking that question is key and is important. It's not, like you said, you're not running a charity. It's still a bank, but having that other focus and not just a complete bottom line numbers only focus is going to be key to that. So that seems like a challenge at hand. So what challenges do you foresee with the idea of creating a Christian bank?
I think firstly, as Tom said, there may be some individual ones, but we wanted to create a global one for a start. So it doesn't exist as far as we can see. But actually, secondly, then getting people to sort of realize that does require, to do a bank, will require lots of capital. So actually finding backers who will help with that would be definitely number one. I think we obviously finding the right team of people who could work alongside. Now, obviously, we've worked alongside many really good people, and we think that we could definitely find that. But obviously, so capital one, people, which would be principally focused. And I think assuming that all of those things fall into place and we do actually get up and running and start in one country and move to another, etc. And the challenges, of course, of just generally running a business. I think actually being continually the biggest challenge that Tom and I kind of tried to address as we look through this is, okay, as Tom had said, many organizations originally years and years ago started out with a Christian focus, but maybe have lost their way through a whole series. Is how do you protect that? How do we protect within IFBank that what money has gone in as a Christian bank will ultimately be a Christian bank, and how do you protect the ethos of that? So kind of wrestling with the challenges of how do we ensure each year that we haven't moved away from our values, and having some either independent way or some challenging way that we can do that. That's the other challenges that we kind of could foresee. And that's okay longer term. We're maybe thinking 10, 20, 30, 40 years away, when Tom will still be a younger man, but I'll be a much older man in that sense, because Tom, despite how he looks, is actually younger than me. And I know that will be a real sort of surprise to your audience, Eric, but he's younger than me. But I think actually protecting that, so that what is ultimately we believe is created and called to be created continues.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, Paul made mention of this before. We went into this with what we thought was where God was calling us to. We both went through a 5-day cycle where God went, I'm going to challenge you with something else. And we came out of that both amazed and floored at the, just the audacity of the question, let alone where and how we can do this. So as Paul said, the ability for us to do it is key. But I think one of the things for us to keep humble and to be able to, we would like to think, we would like to hope that, this calling is about being involved in the weeds and the nitty gritty of doing this. Maybe we're just part of a chain and a conversation, and just simply asking the questions and doing these sort of interviews starts to beg a different movement, or somewhere else. We're painfully aware we would love to be involved in it. We're painfully aware if that's not meant to be, it will not be. So it's trying to find, and we've definitely made a deliberate effort between the two of us and others like yourself who we brought into this journey. Prayer and the ability to hold us accountable to this stuff, both, as Paul said, in one sense, we've got that view on 30, 40 years from now. How do we leave this with it being God's bank, not ours? But what are we doing today and tomorrow, and for the journey between now and that point, to be able to know that we're listening? So we do know that, if this is of God, he will bless it. We also know that our enemy will do anything he can to frustrate and challenge and bring us, fatigue and all those problems. So we've got to put our hopes and prayers and faith. We've called it deliberately integrity and faith, because we want to live in light of that, in knowing that God is absolutely center point to this, and we will go from that. We leap from that point and that point alone.
That's awesome. That is absolutely amazing. And those sound like the foundation for how we can finish up. So I always like to finish up with sort of asking about prayer requests. What are some prayers that we can have for you guys in terms of this whole process, and really how we can go from here?
I think I'm going to let you answer that, Paul.
Absolutely. As I dropped you in it the first time in the first interview, there we go, Tom. I think for us, discernment is important. Dom did mention patience. I mean, we are impatient people on many occasions, but I think a level more of discernment really as to what the next steps may or may not be as things, I suppose, start to open up, particularly out of COVID and travel and sort of, I suppose, as life gets back to some difference out of lockdown. I think discernment as to what our next steps need to be. So that's that, and maybe also just for pray for God to bring people into our lives that are part of that journey, that they are the right people, and that we will have discernment that, we should be talking to this person, or that's actually not of his calling, or whatever. Not they would be a bad person, just that it's not the right part. So I think there's that. And I suppose also a level of contentment around, we're at where we're at, and he will lead us to the next step. So I think that those would be aspects from my perspective.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with those.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming out and joining me again today. This is awesome to be able to talk to you guys again. And thank you all for listening at home. It has been an absolute pleasure. Creating something like this just seems like something that may be so far off, but I think as we come together as a Christian community, this can be done. And that's just an amazing thing that you guys are sort of leading this charge. So again, thank you both for doing that. And everyone at home, take care and God bless.